I never told anyone what my son said to me the day he dropped his daughter off at my door. Not my pastor, not my oldest friend, not even my doctor, who kept asking why my blood pressure wouldn't come down. I just carried it. That's what women my age do. We carry things until our knees give out. I'm 64 years old. I live in a two-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, the same house I've owned for 31 years. The magnolia tree in the front yard was a sapling when I planted it. Now it scrapes the gutter. Time does that. It keeps moving whether you're ready or not. My son's name is Marcus. No, wait, I need to start over, because if I start with Marcus, I'll get angry too fast, and you won't understand the rest of it. Let me start with Iris. Iris is my granddaughter. She was 4 years old the first time I held her alone. Not at a birthday party. Not at Christmas dinner with everyone crowded around. Alone. Just the two of us in my living room at 7 in the morning on a Tuesday in March, her sitting on my couch with a backpack that had a cartoon bunny on it, and me standing in my doorway still in my house coat, trying to understand what my son had just told me before he pulled out of the driveway. He said, "Mama, I just need a few weeks." That was 8 years ago. Iris was born with something called hyperlexia type 3, which most people have never heard of, and the ones who have heard of it usually get it confused. It sits on the autism spectrum. What it means, practically speaking, is that she could read at 2 years old. Actually read, not just memorize. But she couldn't always tell you what she wanted for lunch. She could recite the names of every U.S. president in order before she could tie her shoes. She understood words on a page better than she understood faces. Her first year with me, she didn't look at me directly. She'd sit at the kitchen table while I made oatmeal, and she'd read. Anything. Cereal boxes. The backs of envelopes. She'd read the ingredients list on a bottle of dish soap, and then quietly correct me if I called it soap instead of liquid detergent. She was 5 years old. I started leaving library books on the table instead of the soap. I didn't know what I was doing. I want to be honest about that. I was 60 years old, retired from 28 years working as a medical billing specialist at Piedmont Hospital, and I had never raised a child with any kind of developmental difference. I didn't have a plan. I had love and a library card and a lot of patience I didn't know I had. I called my son 3 times a week for the first month. He'd answer, sometimes. He said he and his wife, I'll call her what she is, which is a woman who never once sent Iris a birthday card after she left, were getting their lives sorted out. I didn't ask what that meant. I should have. Instead, I kept calling, and then the calls got shorter, and then they got less frequent, and then one week I realized I was the only one calling. I stopped counting how many times I reached out after the first year. It hurt too much to keep track. What I kept track of instead was Iris. The school situation was the hardest part, those first 2 years. The elementary school 3 blocks from my house kept telling me Iris needed to be in a self-contained classroom because she couldn't handle transitions. She couldn't handle transitions the way they were doing them, bells ringing, 25 kids moving at once, teachers calling her name in a crowd. But put a book in front of her and ask her a question, and she would answer you in 3 paragraphs with supporting evidence. They were looking at what she couldn't do. I kept trying to show them what she could. I went to every IEP meeting. I started showing up with notes. A friend from church who'd retired from special education helped me understand what Iris was legally entitled to. We pushed for an aid during transitions. We pushed for reading materials at her actual level, which by second grade was high school level. We didn't always win, but we didn't stop. By the time Iris was 9, she'd been moved to a gifted program that had never accommodated a student on the spectrum before. Her teacher that year, a young woman who clearly loved her job more than her paycheck, told me at a parent conference, "I don't know how to explain it. She sees patterns that my adult brain has to work to find." I just nodded. I'd been watching Iris see patterns for 5 years. She started with logic puzzles around 10, then coding tutorials on YouTube. I bought her an old laptop from a pawn shop on Flat Shoals Road for $85, and she used it every single day. She never asked me to buy her games. She wanted to know how the games worked. She'd watch a tutorial, pause it, rewind it, write something down in her notebook. She always had a notebook, and then try it herself. When something didn't work, she didn't melt down the way she used to when she was smaller. She got quiet. She looked at it, and then she figured out what was wrong. I didn't always understand what she was building. I still don't, not fully. But I understood that she was building something. And I understood that she needed me to stay out of her way while she did it, and be there when she looked up. She looked up a lot those years. That's the thing nobody tells you about raising a child with hyperlexia. They are not cold. That's the stereotype, and it's wrong. Iris looked up from her laptop and asked me if I was tired. She noticed when I was sad before I'd admitted it to myself. She said things like, "Grandma, you've been standing at the sink for 11 minutes. Is something wrong?" And I'd realize I'd been standing there thinking about my son, and I'd turn around and say, "Nothing's wrong, baby. Dinner's almost ready." And she'd look at me for one long second like she was fact-checking, and then she'd go back to her screen. She knew. She always knew. She just gave me the grace of not pushing. The application went live 2 months before Iris turned 13. I didn't fully understand it until a tech journalist explained it to me, but here is what I understood in plain terms. Iris had spent 14 months building a reading accessibility tool designed specifically for children with learning differences, dyslexia, hyperlexia, auditory processing disorder. It adjusted fonts, spacing, background colors, and read aloud pacing in real time based on how a child was actually reading, not how they were supposed to be reading. It was free to download. She put it on the App Store for free because, in her words, the kids who need it most can't afford it. Within 6 weeks, it had been downloaded by families in 43 states. A nonprofit out of Atlanta that works with children's literacy reached out to her, then a foundation that funds assistive technology, then a story in a parenting magazine, then a larger story, then an educational technology company in Austin, Texas called her, a 12-year-old in my house in Decatur, and asked if she had considered licensing the technology. I sat beside her for that call. I held her hand under the table. She answered every question in complete, precise sentences. When they asked about her development timeline, she pulled out her notebook. The licensing deal, after everything was structured and finalized through a lawyer I hired, I pulled from my retirement savings to pay for that lawyer, and I would do it again without blinking. Came to $2.4 million over 3 years, with royalties. $2.4 million. I went outside after we got the final paperwork, and I sat on my porch steps, and I did not cry. I am 64 years old, and I have cried at funerals and at my son's wedding, and when Iris read me her first self-written story at age 6. I did not cry that day. I just sat there and looked at the magnolia tree and thought, she did it. All that time she was doing it. I told no one outside of our lawyer and our accountant for 2 months. Iris asked me not to. She said, "I don't want people to treat me differently until I know how I feel about it." I respected that. I respect everything about how her mind works. But somehow, word travels. I still don't know exactly how. Maybe it was the magazine article. Maybe someone in the neighborhood talked. Maybe it was the news alert that ran on a local Atlanta station about a 13-year-old developer from Decatur whose app was being used in schools across the country. I found out my son knew on a Thursday afternoon in October when he knocked on my front door. I hadn't seen Marcus in 4 years, not at Thanksgiving, not at Christmas. He sent Iris a card on her 10th birthday with a $20 bill inside. She read the card, set it on the table, and went back to her notebook. She didn't say anything about it, and I didn't make her. When I opened the door that Thursday, he was standing on my porch in a button-down shirt like he was going to a job interview. His wife was not with him. He had a look on his face I remembered from when he was a teenager and had done something he knew was wrong and was trying to calculate whether I knew yet. I knew. "Mama," he said. "Marcus. Now, can I come in?" I stood in the doorway for a moment. In my mind, I ran through every version of that conversation. Then I stepped aside. He sat in the armchair by the window. I sat across from him on the couch. I didn't offer him anything to drink. I know that sounds cold. It wasn't cold, it was just honest. I was 64 years old, and I had been honest with myself about a lot of things in the past 8 years, and one of those things was that I was done performing comfort for people who had not earned it. He said he'd heard about Iris. He said he was proud. He said, and I will never forget this, never in whatever years I have left, he said, I always knew she had something special in her. I looked at him. He said he wanted to be involved now. He said he and his wife had worked through some things. He said Iris was still his daughter, legally, and that he had rights. He said he'd spoken to someone, not a lawyer yet, just someone, who told him that as her biological parent, he might be entitled to be part of decisions about her finances. I said, "Is that right?" He said yes. He said he wasn't trying to cause problems. He said he just wanted what was best for Iris. I asked him what she'd gotten for her 11th birthday. He looked at the window. I asked him what her diagnosis was called, the full clinical term. He looked at the carpet. I asked him the name of her teacher in 3rd grade, the one who first recognized what she was capable of. He said, "Mama, that's not fair." I said, "No, none of this is fair. We agree on that much." He left after about 20 minutes. He said he'd be in touch. I closed the door and stood in my hallway and listened to his car pull away, and then I walked to the kitchen and I started making dinner because Iris would be home from her afternoon program in 40 minutes, and she liked it when dinner was already smelling like something when she walked in. I didn't tell her about his visit that night. I needed to think first. The letter from the attorney came 11 days later. It was a 4-page document arguing that Marcus, as Iris's biological father, should be appointed co-guardian in matters relating to her financial assets and professional agreements, given that she was a minor. It cited Georgia law. It used words like, "in the best interest of the child," so many times I lost count. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. Then I called my lawyer, a woman named Patricia. No, wait. I said I'd use a different name. A woman I'll call my attorney, because her name isn't what matters. What matters is she picked up on the 2nd ring and said, "I've seen these before. Don't panic." I said I wasn't panicking. She said, "I know. I'm saying it anyway." She walked me through it. The situation was not simple. Marcus had not legally terminated his parental rights. He had simply been absent. In Georgia, that absence mattered, but it did not automatically override his status as her biological father. If he pushed for co-guardianship in financial matters, we would have to respond. She was honest with me. The outcome was not guaranteed. I said, "Tell me what we need." She said documentation, records of Iris's care, medical appointments, therapy records, school communications, everything. Proof that I had been the one making decisions, financing her life, showing up. I had it. 8 years of it. I had kept everything, not because I anticipated this moment, but because that is how I am built. Every folder, every email printed and dated, every report card, every IEP document, every receipt from the psychiatrist and the occupational therapist and the tutoring sessions and the laptop and the books. My attorney said she'd never seen a non-parent caregiver with documentation like mine. I said, "I worked in medical billing for 28 years. I know what a paper trail is." We filed our response. We submitted the documentation, and we waited. Iris knew something was happening. She always knew. One evening, this was maybe 3 weeks after the letter, she came into the kitchen while I was at the table going through papers, and she stood in the doorway and said, "Is it about my dad?" I looked up. I thought about lying. I am not a liar by nature, but I am a grandmother, and sometimes grandmothers lie. I said, "Yes." She came and sat across from me. She pulled one of the folders toward her and looked at it. Then she said, "What does he want?" I told her the truth in simple terms. He wanted to be involved in decisions about her money. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's been gone since I was 4." I said, "I know, baby." She said, "Grandma, I have records too." I looked at her. She got up and went to her room and came back with a notebook. Not her coding notebook, a different one. She'd been keeping a journal since she was 8. Dates, observations, things she'd noticed. She'd documented every birthday he hadn't called, every holiday, every time she'd asked me about him and what I'd said, every time the school had events for fathers and she had brought me instead. She set the notebook on the table between us and said, "My attorney should see this." She said "my attorney" with complete calm, like it was a normal thing for a 13-year-old to say. Maybe for her in that moment it was. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She let me. Then she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "Grandma, When we get to the part where he talks, just let him talk. He'll say things that aren't true, and then he'll have to keep track of them." I stared at her. She said, "People who haven't been paying attention don't have accurate records. He'll slip." 13 years old, looking at me across a table full of legal documents like she'd been thinking several steps ahead this whole time. I thought of course she had. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning downtown at a law office in Midtown Atlanta. Marcus came with an attorney. I came with mine, and with 8 years of paper, and with whatever it is that lives in your chest when you have been the one who showed up. Marcus's attorney spoke first. He was polished. He made it sound reasonable. A father who had faced difficulties but who wanted to be involved now, who was not asking to disrupt Iris's life, only to have a role. My attorney responded, calmly, specifically, date by date, appointment by appointment. Then my attorney submitted Iris's notebook. Marcus's attorney objected, called it irrelevant, said a child's personal diary had no bearing on guardianship. The mediator looked at it, read several pages, said slowly, "It's a first-hand account maintained over 5 years of the child's own experience of her father's absence. That's not irrelevant?" Marcus's attorney pivoted. He started asking about the licensing agreement, whether it had been structured appropriately, whether Iris had received independent counsel, whether my attorney had any conflict of interest given that she'd been involved from the beginning. My attorney answered every question. Then my attorney asked Marcus a question. She asked him, directly on the record, to name Iris's current school. He gave the name of the elementary school she'd attended until 3rd grade. She asked him to name one person at that school Iris had a meaningful relationship with. He named a teacher, the wrong grade, the wrong teacher, a teacher who had, according to documentation, actually filed a complaint about Iris being underserved, a complaint I had supported. She asked him what Iris's diagnosis was called. He said, autism. She said, "Can you be more specific?" He couldn't. She asked him when Iris at last reached out to him directly, by text or call or any recorded means. He said he wasn't sure. She pulled out a phone record I had subpoenaed, a long shot that had come through. Iris had sent him one text message, on her own, at age 11, a photo of her first published code. No message, just the image. He had not responded. The room was quiet. His attorney said something quietly to him. Marcus looked at the table. And I sat there, and I thought about what Iris had said. Just let him talk. He'll have to keep track of things that aren't true. He couldn't. He didn't have the records because he hadn't been paying attention. And when you haven't been paying attention for 8 years, there is nothing to fall back on. The petition was withdrawn at the end of that session, not dismissed, withdrawn. His attorney advised it, from what my attorney later told me. There wasn't a path. I drove home alone. Iris was at her afternoon program. When she got home, I had dinner going. Chicken and dumplings, her favorite, and she walked in, dropped her bag by the door, and said, "How did it go?" I turned from the stove and said, "It's done." He withdrew. She nodded. She went and washed her hands. She came back and helped me set the table. She didn't ask for details. While we were eating, she said, "I'm not angry at him, Grandma. I just don't know him." I put down my fork. She said, "Is that okay, that I'm not angry?" I said, "Baby, you get to feel whatever you feel." She thought about it. She took a bite of her dumpling. She said, "I think I mostly feel like he missed it. He missed who I turned out to be. And that's sad for him." I thought about the magnolia tree outside, how it keeps growing whether anyone pays attention or not. I said, "Yes, that's exactly right." She nodded like we'd reached an agreement in a meeting, and then she asked me if we had any of the peach cobbler left from Sunday. We did. We ate it at the kitchen table with the overhead light on and the street quiet outside, and I thought about how 8 years ago I was standing in my doorway in my housecoat, not knowing what I was walking into. I thought about the $85 laptop and the library cards and the IEP meetings and the late nights when she couldn't sleep and sat next to me on the couch. And I read to her, out loud, even though she could read better than I could, because she liked the sound of my voice. I thought about all of it, and I did not cry. I am 64 years old. I know what it means to carry something, and I know the difference between a weight that breaks you and a weight that turns out, when you finally set it down, to have been holding you upright all along. She turned 14 last spring. She's already talking about what she wants to build next. Something for adults with acquired brain injuries, she says, something that helps them relearn language patterns. She explained it to me for 45 minutes one evening. I understood about a third of it. I told her it sounded important. She said, I think so too. That is enough. That has always been enough. I keep thinking about the $85 laptop. Not the licensing deal, not the courtroom, not the 4-page legal letters sitting on my kitchen table that I read 3 times before I could breathe normally again. I keep coming back to that scratched-up laptop from the pawn shop on Flat Shoals Road, and a little girl who never once asked me for a game, only wanted to understand how the game worked. That is where it all started, I think. Not with the money, and not with a lawyer, and not with my son showing up on my porch in a button-down shirt like 8 years of silence was something we could just step around. It started with Iris sitting at my kitchen table reading the back of a dish soap bottle, because that was what was in front of her, and me learning, slowly, imperfectly, how to see what she needed instead of what I expected. I've thought a lot about what makes a person turn out the way they do, and I don't think it's one thing. I think it's a combination. The character you're born with, the mind you build through use, and the will you develop by being asked to keep going when keeping going is hard. Iris had all three. She was born with a particular kind of honesty, an inability to pretend things were other than they were. She built her mind deliberately, notebook by notebook, tutorial by tutorial, question by question, and she kept going through years of being misread by schools, misunderstood by systems, and left behind by someone who should have stayed. None of those things broke her. I used to think that was because of me. Now, I think I was just a condition, a stable place where what was already in her could grow. That's a humbling thing to realize at 64. You spend 8 years believing you are the reason, and then a 13-year-old sets a notebook on the table and tells you to let the other side talk because they'll run out of truth before they run out of words. And you understand that she was always the reason. You were just paying attention. My son wasn't paying attention. That is the whole of it, really. He was absent not just in body, but in knowledge. He didn't know her diagnosis by its full name. He didn't know her teacher. He didn't know she had sent him a photo of her first published code and waited, and that he hadn't answered. When you haven't been present, you don't have the details. And in a room full of people asking specific questions, the absence of details is its own kind of answer. I am not a vindictive woman. I didn't want him to lose something in that mediation room. I wanted Iris to be safe. Those are different things, and it matters to name them differently. What happened to him was a consequence of choices he made over 8 years, not something I did to him. The distance between where he was and where we were, that was his own. Iris told me she wasn't angry. She told me she mostly felt sad for him, because he'd missed who she turned out to be. I don't know many adults who could frame it that way at 13. I don't know many adults who could frame it that way at 13. I don't know many adults who could frame it that way at all. I think about that when I feel like I didn't do enough, like I should have pushed harder, advocated more, found better resources sooner. And then I think about the person sitting across from me at my kitchen table, eating peach cobbler and already planning her next project, already thinking about adults with brain injuries and how language comes back. And I think, whatever I did, some part of it worked. Not because I was exceptional, because I stayed, because I showed up when it would have been easier not to. Because I kept the paper trail and I kept the pantry stocked and I kept my hands steady at the IEP meetings even when I was terrified. That is all I had. It turned out to be enough.